Well, I want to get into all that in the actual discussion.
What do you mean?
Well, I do a little intro so that I can carve this up and make a YouTube video out of it. Welcome to Punching In, a series of roundtable discussions by musicians to share ideas about workflow and collaboration. So welcome everybody. This is episode 3 of Punching In with Nick Petrillo. Today's episode is all about one of my favorite aspects of the band, the horn section. And we're so lucky, guys, to have two of my all-time favorite horn players right here. We got Vinney Dawson and we got Sam Morgan. So Vinney, why don't we start with you? I just want to let everybody get to know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This is a really cool thing you've been doing. Trumpet-wise, I got my education at CSULB for my bachelor's and SC for my master's. That was a great experience. And then that kind of led my way into landing a job at Disneyland. And so that's basically what I've been doing for the past 7 years now. You know, on top of that, I do a lot of wedding band stuff, musicals, or just various live performances, small club dates to, Coachella or Vegas venues. I've done recording sessions as well. I played at Capitol Records, Fox Studios, Warner Brothers, doing various things ranging from classical to lead trumpet. As a trumpet player in LA, you kind of have to do it all. And I try to do everything at least. As hobbies, I like photography and videography, shooting people in weddings, music videos, as we recently did, Nick. That was a lot of fun. A lot of it translates over.
So Vinney and I met in that big band in Reseda, probably the third or fourth week I was out here.
At the old Paladinos in Reseda.
Yeah, we worked at Disneyland together, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about that gig and some of the things that go into that gig. How about you, Sam? Give us a little about yourself.
I guess the most relevant point of my background is that I come from a family of musicians. Both of my parents are working piano players and singers and have been for their whole lives in addition to my whole life. I've always kind of been around it. I've always been around people who did it as a living. And so it kind of just wound up being me rolling into the groove that was already warm, you know what I mean? And so I'm very thankful for that. Very, thankful to have had a background, a youth in music. A lot of my earliest formative musical memories I would only have had because I got to be alongside my parents and alongside, people who really took a liking to me and kind of took me under their wing. And so I've definitely spent a lot of time listening and a lot of time out watching other musicians. I went to Hamilton High School, which is a music academy in Culver City, which had a wonderful program. Very thankful for all of my teachers there. From there, I started doing things that allowed me to meet as many people as I can. Things like big bands and things like playing for writers. And I really think that the most, important part to any musician's background is who they spent their time with, how the people that they worked with as early professionals and even as students, how that affected their growth and from there, their influence onto the scene.
Well, Sam, I mean, your parents are very prolific in the industry, and from an early age, you probably got that onset of musicality from them.
It's interesting because the process of learning music, it wasn't something that was forced upon me. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, oh, I have to sit and practice 8 hours a day, and that's the only thing. It's being exposed to it from a young age, right, and understanding how good music is for the rest of your brain, the skill sets that you learn in practicing and mastering an instrument. You really get to use every part of your brain. It got to the point where when I got to choose what I wanted to do, it was like, why would I do anything else? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So Sam, to get back on the Jimmy McConnell thing, I remember you even being a section leader and a band leader at one point in that.
Sure. Yeah. I worked alongside Jimmy a lot. That's another one of those things. Jimmy's band is one of those bands that is so great for people who are entering the scene and really want to have an opportunity to work with people who've really done it, who really have been on the scene and really have done the things that, we all grew up learning about. That type of experience is absolutely invaluable. Reaching out to members of the generations of musicians that came before us is so crucial in being a young player and knowing what came before you so that you can, appreciate it moving forward.
I mean, just the stories from the guys in that group were astonishing my first year out here, hearing the rise and sometimes the fall of great musicians throughout this industry. I want to talk first about the horn section as a family, right? When you're in a big orchestra, you have the brass family, you have the woodwind family, you have the string family, and all of these groups come together to create the orchestra. A rhythm section band, adding horns, is the same concept. So we'd have a section and then piling that onto a rhythm section and then creating a coherent unit. Being a section leader under the music director, how do you guys interpret what the music director's needs are in order to create a uniform section, say in the sax section or in the trumpet section in that orchestra?
I would say it all boils down to communication. Obviously, the larger the section is, the more effort it's going to take to get everyone on the same page. But the most straightforward path to a coherent section is everyone in the section knowing exactly what person to look to. And usually it's one person in the horn section, and they will have their eye on the music director and know immediately how to make a change themselves. And everyone who's watching that lead player can immediately make that change as well. I think that it all boils down to knowing who to look for the information and how to receive it once it comes out.
I always look to you guys when I'm music directing. Once I give you the charts and the articulations to kind of work out intonation, cutoffs, and all of that kind of stuff on the spot between the two of you.
I think the section leader can decide what's going to happen, but if one person does it and the other three people don't do it, then the section leader sounds like he's wrong. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter who does it. If everybody doesn't do it together, it's going to sound like it's not right. So I think that when it comes down to actually writing out articulations, knowing how your lead player interprets those particular articulations and even having a discussion about it, it's a quick 3-second conversation. Hey, how short do you make staccato notes? Or hey, how long do you want this phrase? Can make a world of difference in making a cohesive sound.
You know, I think really knowing your role in the section is very important as well, because the whole point is to make the lead lines sound as best as they can. So if that's typically the lead trumpet. So if you're supporting role, then that's your job. Like whatever it takes. For me, it really just starts at intonation. That's kind of like the very beginning, because if you don't have that, there's certain frequencies that don't happen, and that's really important for horn sections. That's kind of the whole point. Always serve the music.
I mean, that's the deal with different musicians. You have to blend with each separate musician's intonation.
Yeah, and a lot of the unique thing about playing a woodwind instrument or a brass instrument is that each person has a very unique sound of their own. That's kind of what makes it special. When you find that magic combo, like when me and Sam play together, we just have a good blend. We know where we're at. He knows how to support, and it kind of makes the job easier. It's really comfy as a lead trumpet player to just ride the wave.
You know, I don't usually hire 2 trumpet players, but I also write higher lines so that, you know, if we have to do stabs or fall offs or something, I give you the responsibility to take care of that. And I think one of the great things that Sam is able to do is support you, doubling you in an octave.
Especially nowadays, like a lot of the horn sections that you encounter are smaller due to, you know, various things. But usually that's 2 horns, especially in a wedding band. It's a trumpet and a tenor sax, you know, so that relationship's very important.
Yeah, I always find it very interesting how full both of you guys make the sound, because I've been using 2 horns on gigs for at least the last 5 years, and I usually call you guys on that stuff.
Horns have a unique function in, especially like in a pop ensemble. They can be strings, they can be percussive, they can be melodic, they can be harmonic, they can really fill a lot of gaps. A horn section can really make a lot of different textures. Yep. I think that's my favorite thing about what a horn, like just a live energy that a horn section brings. Fortunately, you can't duplicate it with MIDI technology yet.
I've tried, trust me.
I don't hold it against you, man.
How many wedding bands have I played in where I've had to do the horn lines for the Michael Jackson stuff? And
hey man, hope you got paid more for it.
So you had the section leader thing down. And then, you know, when you hear the rhythm section coming together, are you guys changing anything fundamentally? Like Sam, you had mentioned, how short is the staccato? Is it a sticky staccato? Is it an extremely short staccato? Are those articulations things you're changing on the spot, you know, when you're in the zone with the band?
I would say absolutely. Every genre has a set starting point where you're like, okay, if I'm playing, you know, this style of Latin music, I know that articulations have to be just so. When you first listen to a piece or a tune, you want to listen for that underlying vibe. But the beautiful thing about live music is that it's collaborative. So if the rhythm section decides to go in a different direction, or they decide to emphasize a certain aspect of the phrase, a horn section that's really listening could say, okay, let's make this one pop. You know, and you can do that with body language. You see a lot of horn players, you know, like to do the little dance thing, like do little shoulder moves. Body language is so important on stage, especially among horn players. Watching another horn player breathe, you can see how they're setting. You can see how, you know, wide or quick their breath is. There are all kinds of things that if you're paying attention, it can really kind of become more than the sum of its parts.
I think that's what really makes horn section special as well, is that you have the ability to change your articulation. As long as it's together, as long as it's not sloppy, you can imagine the multitude of ways that can be implemented.
I just want to take a pit stop on solo playing, because I know you guys have done this kind of stuff with me a lot. What exactly would happen if you were hired without another horn player? What would you be doing during a gig?
Single horn, like on the side playing, becomes about character. If you consider songwriting and performance to be storytelling, then every aspect of that ensemble has some storytelling value. Right. And so what you don't want to do as a horn player is insert yourself in places where the story isn't about you. If you have the right character, you can really add a whole nother dimension to the song. If something is in there simply to be there, you start to wonder, how it relates to the rest of the thing, and it kind of muddles the message. And that sometimes that means just not playing anything at all. Sometimes that means knowing when to just say, what, I'm not on this tune. This is about me.
So at which point you pick up a tambourine.
Yeah, I think that's something you do very well, Sam. Kind of weaving in and out, especially like weaving in and out of vocalists. You don't want to step on their toes because they are the foreground. I've always kind of admired that about you. Mainly like sax players are asked to do that kind of thing, but sometimes trumpet players, like depending on the type of band it is, or oftentimes like a trumpet player will either put a mute in to change the character of the sound, or switch instruments to like something like a flugelhorn, which is kind of like a trumpet but a little rounder of a sound. Yeah, I mean, all the same principles apply. Just really serve the music and know your place.
Really great producer told me the vocal is king, and you do not step on the vocalist's toes at all. I mean, that is front and center the entire arrangement, and all of us are doing our best to create counterlines around that. And to piggyback on that, Sam, I always compare you to Clarence Clemens, man. Not only your tone, but the way you interact with the singer. I mean, I don't think there was any better counterline to Bruce Springsteen than Clarence Clemens.
Like I said, Clarence Clemens was a character. You know what I mean? You knew exactly who was playing every time Clarence came on the horn. You know what I mean? And he was always right in the right place, and it was always the right time for him. He's the perfect example of like saxophone in pop culture. You know what I mean? What people think of when they think of the saxophone. It's like, it's a part of the band, but it also sits on top of the band. Yep. It's like kind of like a tentacle that's flailing around. You know what I mean? Like one saxophone player sounds more different on a fundamental level than most other instruments.
Well, the great thing about the E Street Band was they had that whole Motown thing going where usually Barry is the one that's doubling that bass line. But he would do that in E Street. He would just play those long, low tones that were doubling whatever the bass was doing underneath what Bruce was doing.
Right.
That's where that sound came from. And then he would hop up, man, in between lines. I mean,
right.
All over Born to Run. That whole record is just him doing back and forth with Bruce.
Yeah, man. It's knowing when to step forward and knowing when to be back. When a guitar player or a drummer, when it's not their time, they've still got stuff to do. They've still got places to, they can kind of fall into the groove. They can kind of allow their musical experience to just drive the rest of it. As a horn player, it comes down to your own discretion.
Right. So actually, Vinney, that brings me to you, because trumpet, I feel, gets the short end of the stick always with solo stuff, because you guys, being a soprano voice, it's very hard for you to stay in the background.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, man. Like, I'll use a wedding gig as an example. That gig could be very taxing or not. It just kind of depends on what music's being called. Really, you just have to be ready for it. Like if you're coming off of September and then the next tune is like something mellow and it has a trumpet solo in it, like you have to be able to do that. And for trumpet players, there's like different things that you kind of develop or learn on your own, like to relieve some of that tension off your face to get there, because that's definitely a different buzz coming off of September, especially the last line.
I remember there was one gig in particular. It was that gig we did, that Superman medley. You had brought something to my mind that I hadn't really thought of before, was how long I was keeping you in the stratosphere to cover all those trumpet lines. I was killing your embouchure. I mean, we were basically doing that on a loop for 2 hours. And we wound up having to strip some of those lines out, and I wound up doubling them on keyboards because it was easier. Give us a little bit of information on how to take care of an embouchure during a long gig. Like say it's a 4 or 5 hour wedding gig. And yeah, I mean, including the vocalists, we're all playing stuff that is high for everybody. How are you handling that?
Trumpet players like to relieve tension off their face by like blowing their lips. So something like that, puffing your lips out a little bit, maybe changing a mouthpiece, because for something a little bit more demanding, you're going to be playing on a more efficient mouthpiece. If I have to come off of something very demanding and then play something soft and sweet, I'm most likely switching a mouthpiece to something that I know will give me a darker sound.
Mouthpieces need to be warm though when you're using them.
Yeah, I mean, not really. Like you're already kind of warm in your lips, the blood's flowing, especially when your lips kind of memorize where everything is on the mouthpiece, especially if you've been playing it a while. Say if you have like a break, like coming off a hard set, you have 3 more to go. On the breaks, I'll do lip stretches where I'm pulling my lips like that and up and down and all these kind of weird things, but it really, really helps.
It all depends on the arranger, I find. Nick, you have really come a long way in empathy when it comes to horn players. I find it's definitely a skill. Arrangers need to talk to their musicians and know what is feasible on the instrument. I find especially piano players tend to do this because the nature of the piano is, all of your fingers are even. But with horns, especially trumpet, it's like weightlifting. You know what I mean? If you don't do it right, you can really hurt yourself. And so I think one of the most important things, especially in a professional situation, is knowing when to speak to your arranger, knowing when to be like, hey, look, I know that this is how it was on the record, but for a live situation, we have to accommodate. Can we offer you this? And, you can make compromises with arrangers. But if you're talking about the band being a unit and making sure that the whole band sounds as good as they can for the entirety of the night, you're not serving yourself by having your trumpet player kill his chops in the first set.
Well, I'll speak from an arranging perspective as far as the school thing is they don't really get into where things get really tricky for horn players. What they do get into is how high can you go? So don't write above a high C.
Oh, that's like a real bare bones way to look at it. You know what I mean? It's like
over the course of the time talking to you guys, I mean, Vinney, you and I have had countless discussions about this. I learn where things start getting super tricky on the instrument. You should not always be at the highest point all the time. What are the benefits of having a larger ensemble, say 4 to 6 horns in a pop band?
Bigger the better, I say. Especially for the lead trumpet player, it just makes everything a lot easier. Even having that third horn player in a wedding band, which is often a trombone, even having that is like a lifesaver.
Why is that, Vinney? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the timbre of the instrument, but probably more so the frequencies, especially when you get a trombone player that's kind of matching your octave. Man, that's such a sweet sound, and put the tenor sax in the middle of that, or flipping it like Chicago did, where the bone on the lead line, or that's such a classic sound. Some challenges with larger horn sections is some people change the way they play, like they'll exaggerate their articulations more because they really want everybody to know where they are and how they're playing it. And it's important for that to be very consistent the larger the horn section is.
Would you say, like, if it was a 6-piece ensemble with the rhythm section, that lead trumpet would be the section leader, to go back to that?
Yeah, typically the lead trumpet player is a section leader because they're the most exposed. They're the one doing all the heavy lifting. Somebody who's even more important is if it's a section with 2 trumpets, the second trumpet player, because that can really make or break you if you don't have somebody who's matching you intonation wise or not really coming up to your sound. Oftentimes I think loudness can be confused a little bit. I'm just trying to aim down the center of the horn.
Right.
And I'm really trying to project that. So definitely like in large venues where you're mic'd, you don't have to, worry about that too much. You can but you have to really know how to play within yourself and know your instrument and where that lies. So really knowing your role, especially in a large horn section, is super important.
When I write for you, but we're doing smaller venues, sometimes I just tell you to go to flugelhorn. The brassy quality of the trumpet up there, it's just not going to work in a smaller setting. Is it hard to blend with brass being a woodwind player in that scenario and not having an alto or a bari?
Depending on where you are on the instrument, you can really accomplish different tones. And so if you have a tenor in the low register, that can really fill up a section that's kind of otherwise based in the higher register. And also the tenor can jump up and pop the stuff that some of the trumpet might want to do.
Right.
So like it can either be an alto or a bari, whereas an alto is kind of replacing a trumpet, and a bari intersects with a trombone. Like they fill similar roles. But the tenor, I feel, can find its way in any of those positions.
I do a lot of octave doubling. If I'm going to harmonize, I very rarely use a 3-note harmony. So I'll either put Sam on the 6th below where the lead is, or I'll have him double octave. If I have a trombonist, I usually have trombone doubles either at the octave or in prime unison, and then I have Sam playing a 3rd or a 6th. I very, very rarely throw all that harmony so that things don't get muddy, because that guitar and piano already, I mean, it could be mud central if there's so much happening there.
It's a conflict of two schools of thought.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously a horn section that's playing dope harmonies that sound good and are blending. That sounds fantastic, and everybody wants to be a part of that. Yeah. But I also feel like sometimes having excessive harmony changes the character of the horn section from, oh, this is a statement we're trying to make on the side to complement the lead line, versus don't look at the lead line, look at what we're doing. This is, this is all this motion. There are certain situations where you can kind of combine those two things, and you can have a section of the song where you have deep, dense harmony in the background over a complicated lead line, and it becomes, a part of that section of the song.
Right.
But knowing when to wield it, and when to, things like unisons and very basic harmonies are more powerful as statements. We are a part of the motion that's behind the lead line, as opposed to conflicting motion behind the lead line.
Yeah. But like you said, it's also stylistic, because if we were doing, for instance, Vinney, you're doing September, you would much rather have those 6 horns doing something very interesting in those horn breaks.
Unisons all the way. And it'll make you sound bigger as well. It really is the way to go. Unison octaves.
Even in a song like September that features huge, sections of harmony, all the sections with fast motion, that's all unison, because when the motion is that fast and you have that much going on, the harmony is lost. It becomes, you can't follow the melody. You can't decide, okay, there's what I'm supposed to be listening to and everything else is underneath. It's not until you have a moment where all the voices are equal, you can be like, okay, here we are in harmony. Even the split between the two can make an artistic statement, you know what I mean, where you're going from unison into harmony.
Within a phrase, you should not be changing from a certain harmony to a unison or out, inside or out of it. To be honest with you, I've gone against that a lot, man, just to bring out certain phrases and make them pop. And I treat them almost like background vocals, whereas if you're doing a vocal background and then you want a certain note to pop, that's where you split off into harmony. If I really want something to shimmer, I'll just pop right into an octave and then back into our harmonies. I remember you and I used to have a lot of discrepancies about, hats versus accents versus accented staccatos versus even slurs, like how slurs work correctly within a horn section. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've learned throughout my years is the importance of just the rest, to distinguish how short that staccato is going to be and where the breath mark is for you guys. I mean, the larger the ensemble, how crucial it is to know where that's going to be.
Yeah, and that can change depending on the tune too. You can write a staccato for chord notes on one tune and then, hats on the other. It really depends what you're trying to convey. And I think that's what's really important in a horn chart. Yeah. Is knowing how to convey that. And even like you can do that with slurs, like for phrasings, to mark that phrasing, and being able to show that kind of you're going to get to the sound that you want a lot quicker. Right. If you know that information.
It shapes the horn section's relationship to the rhythm section behind it.
Right.
And if the horn section isn't articulating like the rhythm section is playing, it doesn't sound like they're two parts of the same unit. Context, knowing what style of music you're playing. There are just certain rules, certain styles say, okay, if a note is written like this, you need to expect it to sound like this.
Right.
And, like different musicians from different, places interpret articulations differently. So, it's about context, and I'd say it's also about communication. It's about making a unified decision as a section. It's half in the writing and half in your expectation based on the style.
Yeah, and being open to change as well. A lot of people just kind of hunker down in like, no, I play the way I play, that doesn't serve the music. So
How do you guys deal with not having a lick of music in front of you, except maybe the master rhythm chart?
I mean, what I will say is that there's a huge difference between having no chart at all and having a master rhythm chart.
Yeah.
You know, just simply for form, simply for knowing when a certain section is going to come back in. Obviously, with situations like that, the smaller the horn section, the easier it is for it to sound like we know what we're doing. Knowing when to not get in the way, and knowing when what you're adding is, you know, if you hear the chorus and you say, okay, during this section, this is kind of open, so maybe we can throw some pads in there. And oh, do you hear that rhythm line at the end there? We can grab that. And just kind of being able to listen actively and being okay with not being in on the first verse or the first chorus or even the first bridge. You know what I mean? Just not stepping in where you don't know what's going to happen. You can, if you have some kind of roadmap to know how much time you have left to say what you want to say and what the kind of guidelines are for how you want to say it.
like Sam said, like really listening to what's going on, and you know, if it's not appropriate to play, then just lay out. But, you know, me and Sam have been on multiple occasions where one week we're like, oh, yeah, I don't think this song needs it. And then the other week we're like, well, let's try this. And we end up really liking it. And so we go with it and it kind of stays. And then that really develops and it starts to become a song, starts to become a part.
It's a matter of listening to the people around you and hearing what's there and what isn't there. Right. And knowing, you know, say, okay, if that's missing, then I can put that there. It really becomes about personal instinct at that point, and being respectful of the other people in the ensemble and trying to find the best way to use what you bring to add as opposed to detract from the sound.
Yeah, like that, you're really going to blend well together if you know how each other plays, and more importantly, the intonation is there. And it's always adjusting, always changing. Like the larger you get in the horn section, it's even more apparent because say you could have like a super tight horn section and then you have somebody sub out and it completely falls. You know, that's just something you have to, as a horn player, you have to be willing to adapt and learn and be open to changing certain aspects of how you play.
Music is like conversation. And it's like when you are talking to somebody and they're listening to what you're saying and they're, you know, agreeing with what you're saying, it's a lot easier to get involved in what you're doing and to kind of forget about the outside circumstances. And so I would say that when you're playing music with people who you know and who you can predict, there's definitely a lot of meeting in the middle when it comes to kind of your fellow horn players. This is the time that we all really need to focus in. And it's like, oh, getting the opportunity to know how your other players are going to react to any given situation, you know, just allows for a better rapport, just like how it's easier to tell jokes around people that you know as opposed to trying to tell jokes to strangers.
You have to be able to know how to play well with others. Even if you've never played with them before, there's a lot of situations where that happens and you just have to be ready for it. And, you know, a lot of that is just certain things that horn players over the years have developed as like a standard. And
for instance, the Disneyland band, is it hard to go in there on with different people gridded and just fall in and be able to do those shows immediately just like that? Do you know all those players at this point that you can just fall in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that situation is a little different just because there are rehearsals that happen, right. And you are playing with at least like a set group of people. You know, there are subs that come in and there's a learning curve there too. So yeah, I mean, that becomes difficult, especially if you're subbing in on the lead parts, you know, then you really have to know your deal. All the players there are just like, you know, some of the best in the world. Everything's at a high level and everybody rises to it. I can't tell you how many times like, I've been out on like just a normal set in the middle of the day, it's hot, and people just rise to the occasion, you know, play the music, and it's super cool to experience that, especially for work.
Music is subjective overall. I mean, that's
right.
Right. So my interpretation of something may be different than your interpretation of something. But the way I'm approaching it always with you guys is you are the masters of your instruments.
That's the beauty of music as a collaborative art. You know what I mean? Like we all have our own tool sets. Yeah. And when we can all, you know, can come together and really kind of communicate what we want to achieve out of what we have. Yeah. It makes the whole process what it should be.
Yeah, man. I mean, the beautiful thing of the last 3 episodes is it seems that our theme is listening and communication. I mean, that's just what it is with the band.
And that's the whole thing about music. I mean, you listen to it.
Guys, this was amazing. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, man. Take care and stay creative.
All right. Be safe, you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you all soon.